A few months ago, I noticed little things that I brushed off at first: late nights out with friends, unexplained messages on her phone, and a general coldness between us that hadn't been there before. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. After all, people go through phases, and we had our share of rough patches before. But there was something different about this one, and it was impossible to ignore. When she started getting dressed up for book club nights and work dinners a bit too often, I knew something wasn't right. One night, after a work dinner where she came home suspiciously late, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I started taking precautions, setting things up just to see if my gut was wrong or if there was more to this than she let on. I didn't want to explode over nothing. But I also didn't want to keep feeling like I was being played. So, I got myself a small camera system. Nothing crazy, just a few discreet cameras to put around our place to catch her in the act, or clear her of any wrongdoing. I waited for a weekend. She had mentioned she'd be busy with the girls, and I set up the cameras. One in our living room, one in the hallway, and one pointing toward the bedroom. It felt surreal, like I was a character in someone else's story. But I couldn't ignore the pit in my stomach any longer. Once the cameras were in place, I knew I had to bide my time. I'd get my proof, one way or another. I'd be able to stop this gnawing doubt once and for all, and if it turned out she was innocent, I'd swallow my pride and apologize. After installing the cameras, I was on edge. Every small sound, every innocent text alert she got seemed suspicious, and it took everything in me not to confront her right away. But I wanted solid proof. I'd come this far, and I needed to see it through. About a week after setting up the cameras, my patience paid off. She told me she was heading out that weekend again. This time, she said, it was just a casual lunch with friends, followed by some self-care time. Something in her tone struck me as rehearsed, as if she'd prepped this excuse. But I played along, nodding and telling her to have a good time. The night before her day out, I decided to add a little twist to my plan. I went into our bedroom, pulled back the sheets on her side, and, very carefully, sprayed a thin mist of pepper spray along the edges of her pillowcase and sheets. The idea was simple: I wanted to make things uncomfortable for them, if she really was planning on bringing someone back here. Just a little deterrent, a bit of discomfort, so they'd have to rethink this cozy setup. That Saturday morning, she left the house dressed to the nines, makeup flawless, hair done up in a way I hadn't seen in a while. I felt a pang of sadness seeing her so put together, knowing she wasn't doing it for me. But I brushed it off and waited. As soon as she walked out the door, I checked the camera feeds. I had an app on my phone that let me monitor everything live. Hours passed, and I busied myself with errands, constantly checking my phone every few minutes. It wasn't until late in the afternoon that I finally saw movement on the cameras. Sure enough, she walked back into our home, with a man following close behind her. He looked around cautiously, like he was checking for something. My heart started pounding as I watched her lead him inside, laughter and playful touches exchanged between them. They walked through the house, looking relaxed, as if they were on a romantic getaway. I clenched my fists, biting back the fury. This was it, proof that my suspicions were real. They eventually made their way to the bedroom, and I prepared myself for whatever was about to unfold. Part of me almost wanted to confront her then and there, but I held back, forcing myself to wait just a little longer. I wanted to see how far she'd go. As they settled into the bedroom, I watched on the feed as they began to get comfortable, until the effects of the pepper spray started to kick in. At first, I saw him rub his eyes, a confused expression on his face. She started coughing, fanning herself, clearly uncomfortable. The look on her face as she realized something was wrong was almost satisfying. Within minutes, the two of them were a mess, sneezing, coughing, eyes tearing up. The effect was immediate and brutal. She looked around the room, probably trying to figure out what had caused it, while he stumbled toward the door, wiping his face with the sleeve of his shirt. They hurried out of the bedroom, practically tripping over each other in their haste to leave. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction as I watched them scramble, their little, romantic rendezvous spoiled by something as simple as a spray. Once they left, I sat there in silence, feeling a mix of rage, satisfaction, and sadness. The worst part was confirmed, I now knew the truth. But now came the hard part, confronting her and seeing how she would try to talk her way out of this. After watching them scramble out, my mind raced with what to do next. I knew that confronting her would be messy. Part of me felt vindicated, even amused at their reaction, but another part was boiling with hurt. I knew I couldn't just let her brush this off with a casual excuse. A couple of hours later, she returned home, her face flustered, and I could tell she tried to freshen up. She gave me a quick smile, but I could see the nervous flicker in her eyes. She was waiting for me to ask about her day, so I decided to go for the direct approach. "So," I said, not looking up from the book I was pretending to read, "how was your little, self-care day?" I kept my tone casual, almost detached. She hesitated, and I could see her calculating what to say. "It was good. Just, same old stuff." She laughed, but there was something forced in it. I looked up, meeting her gaze, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. "That's funny," I said, keeping my voice steady, "because it looked like you were doing more than just relaxing. Who was the guy you brought home?" Her face fell, and I watched as she tried to recover, her expression slipping between shock, guilt, and then finally, anger. What are you talking about?" she stammered, feigning ignorance. "Are you spying on me now?" "Yes," I replied calmly, "I am. Because you've been lying to me." I held her gaze, letting her see that I was done with the games. She crossed her arms defensively, trying to make it seem like I was in the wrong. "So you think it's okay to just invade my privacy?" she spat, eyes blazing with feigned indignation. "You've been watching me? That's messed up." I shook my head, sighing as her excuses and defensive tactics made my frustration rise even more. "Sarah, stop. You brought another man into our home, into our bedroom. Don't try to twist this around on me. You betrayed my trust." For a moment, she just stood there, her face twitching between anger and something that looked like guilt. But she still didn't apologize. Instead, she turned and stormed out of the room, muttering something under her breath about how she couldn't deal with this right now. Watching her walk away, I felt a surge of anger mixed with disappointment. She was refusing to own up to her actions, trying to spin this into my fault for catching her. I knew I'd need to keep pushing for the truth if she wasn't going to offer it willingly. Once she'd stormed off, I sat alone, staring at the empty doorway. This was beyond frustrating. She'd turned this whole situation on me, trying to make me the villain. But I wasn't going to let her get away that easily. Later that night, when she finally came out of the bedroom, I was waiting for her, seated on the couch, the video footage on my phone ready to play. She walked into the room, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. I took a deep breath, my voice steady but firm. "Sarah," I said, holding my phone up, "if you're going to keep lying to me, maybe it's time you saw exactly what I saw today." I hit play, and the sounds and images filled the room. Her face went pale as the video played, her eyes widening with every passing second. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She glanced at me, then at the phone, as if desperately searching for an explanation. But we both knew there was none. Finally, after a long silence, she managed to stammer, It's not what it looks like." The cliché felt almost insulting coming from her mouth, and I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Really? So, what exactly does it look like then, Sarah?" I pressed, my voice growing colder. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty clear." She was cornered, and she knew it. I could see the gears turning as she searched for some kind of story, some way out. But the panic in her eyes told me that she had no idea what to say. "Fine," she finally muttered, her voice small. I made a mistake. It was a lapse in judgment. Her gaze fell to the floor, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely remorseful. But was it remorse for her actions or just the fact that she'd been caught? A lapse in judgment? I repeated, incredulously. Is that really all this was to you? Bringing someone else into our home, lying to me, sneaking around, that's just a mistake. Her eyes flashed with anger again, and I could see she was ready to go back on the defensive. What do you want from me? Do you want me to grovel? I said it was a mistake. Can't we just move past this? The audacity of it left me speechless. Here she was, caught red-handed, and now she wanted to just sweep it all under the rug. I'd been ready to hear her out, to understand what had driven her to this point. But her blatant disregard for the impact of her actions on me, on our relationship, left me cold. No, Sarah, I replied, voice steady. We can't just move past this. You need to own up to what you did. Because right now, all I see is someone who's sorry they got caught, not someone who's actually sorry for what they did. She looked away, her expression hardening again, and for a moment, I thought she might leave the room entirely. But instead, she sank into a chair across from me, her shoulders slumping. She was silent, and in that silence, I saw a crack in her defenses. Part of me wanted to let her continue, to see if she'd finally be honest. But the other part, the part that was angry and betrayed, wasn't sure it could ever forgive her for what she'd done. Sarah sat across from me in silence, her hands fidgeting. I'd thought catching her in the act would mean she'd finally admit everything, lay it all out in the open, own up to it. But she just kept staring at the floor, avoiding my gaze. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. It was a stupid mistake, okay? I didn't mean for it to happen. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It was one time, and it just got out of control. One time. I repeated, my skepticism clear. Is that supposed to make this better? I trusted you, Sarah. And you threw it all away for what? She looked at me, her eyes pleading. I don't know why I did it. I felt neglected, like we were just roommates instead of partners. I know it doesn't justify anything, but that's how I felt. She paused, searching my face for a reaction, but I remained silent, letting her continue. And then there was him, always showing interest, making me feel wanted. It hurt to hear this, but I couldn't deny there was a hint of truth in what she was saying. Life had gotten busy, and maybe I hadn't been as attentive as I should have been. But that didn't excuse her actions. So, you felt neglected, and your answer was to cheat? To throw away everything we've built together for a few moments of feeling wanted? My voice cracked, betraying the hurt that was bubbling just below the surface. She looked away again, as if she couldn't face the reality of what she'd done. And at that moment, I realized this conversation was going nowhere. No matter how much I wanted answers, I wasn't going to get the closure I was looking for tonight. The house was quiet after our conversation, an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air. Sarah had retreated to the bedroom, and I was left alone in the living room, trying to make sense of everything. I replayed her words in my mind, searching for some kind of truth, some explanation that would make this hurt less. But nothing she'd said gave me any comfort. I needed time to think, time to process everything without her excuses clouding my thoughts. So, I made a decision. Early the next morning, before she woke up, I packed a bag and left. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed space. I left her a simple note on the kitchen counter. I need time to think. Don't contact me. For the first time in years, I was on my own, without her. And strangely, despite the pain and anger, there was a sense of relief in that solitude. Days turned into a week as I stayed with a friend, trying to come to terms with what had happened. During that time, I reflected on our relationship, on the little signs I'd ignored, the red flags I'd brushed aside. Looking back, I saw moments that should have raised alarm bells. Times when she'd seemed distant, moments when she'd pulled away from me emotionally. I'd blamed it on work stress, on life, but now I knew better. The anger I felt began to transform into something else, a kind of cold acceptance. I realized that the relationship we once had was gone, shattered by her betrayal. And though it hurt, a part of me understood that holding on to her would only prolong my pain. I returned home after 10 days, not because I was ready to forgive but because I needed to face her and make a decision about our future. She was there waiting, clearly anxious and desperate to know what I was thinking. "Are you going to leave me?" she asked, her voice trembling. The desperation in her eyes was genuine, but I wasn't moved. "Not anymore." "I don't know yet," I replied honestly. "But if we're going to work through this, it's going to take a lot more than apologies. And I'm not sure you're even capable of that kind of effort." For the first time, she looked truly broken, as if she was finally beginning to understand the weight of what she'd done. But was it too late? We spent the next few days in an uneasy truce, discussing boundaries and expectations if we were to rebuild our relationship. I told her that trust was not something she'd get back overnight and that any further lies or deceit would mean an immediate end. Sarah agreed to my terms, but I could see the strain it was putting on her. She was uncomfortable, on edge, constantly trying to prove herself. And while a part of me wanted to believe she was genuinely remorseful, the other part couldn't shake the image of her with him. As part of our agreement, we decided to attend counseling. We both agreed it was necessary, a neutral space to unpack everything. The sessions were intense, often painful, forcing us both to confront parts of our relationship that we'd ignored for too long. The counselor encouraged us to be open, to address the hurt head-on. Sarah opened up about feeling overlooked, about how she tried to talk to me but felt I hadn't really listened. And while I acknowledged my faults, I reminded her that nothing could justify her betrayal. After several sessions, I felt a flicker of hope. We were talking more openly than we had in years, addressing issues that had long been buried. It wasn't easy, and the pain of her betrayal still lingered, but for the first time, I saw a path forward. Sarah seemed genuinely committed, willing to do whatever it took to make things right. She'd given me access to her phone, deleted contacts, and was doing everything she could to rebuild trust. Just as I thought we were making progress, Sarah's betrayal found a way to resurface, even unintentionally. One evening, I was using her phone to look up a photo we'd taken together at a recent counseling session, a small memory that had made me feel like maybe, just maybe, we were truly healing. But while scrolling through her photos, a notification banner appeared, a message from her lover. My heart dropped. The message was short, vague, but it was undeniably from him. After all the boundaries we'd set, after every step we'd taken to rebuild trust, this one thing threatened to undo it all. Sarah had assured me she'd cut all ties with him, insisted he was nothing but a mistake she wanted to erase. But there it was, evidence that the past wasn't as buried as she claimed. When I confronted her, her face went pale, and I saw her confidence waver, replaced with panic. She stammered through an explanation, I just forgot to delete him from my contacts. He must have reached out randomly. I swear, I haven't talked to him. The excuse, weak as it was, sounded genuine. But that didn't erase the pain. Her oversight, whether intentional or not, felt like a betrayal all over again. We'd been working hard to rebuild a fragile trust, and this slip-up, this connection, however slight, shattered the small foundation we'd rebuilt. I felt as if I were right back at the beginning, with doubts and anger consuming me all over again. The days following that setback were tense. I wrestled with a choice I'd hoped I'd never have to make. After everything we'd been through, all the efforts and hours of therapy, it felt like it should be enough to forgive her one more time. But deep down, I realized I couldn't keep ignoring these betrayals, whether by accident or intention. One evening, after a sleepless night, I sat her down for what I knew would be our final conversation. Sarah, I began, my voice steady but weary, I don't think I can do this anymore. I've tried. I've wanted to believe that we could fix this, but I can't keep doubting you, can't keep questioning every glance at your phone. This isn't trust. This isn't love anymore. Her face crumpled as the weight of my words sank in. Tears spilled over as she reached for my hands, pleading, please don't do this. I'll do anything to fix it. I love you. But I shook my head, feeling a strange calm amidst the heartbreak. We tried. I gave you everything I could to make this work. But every time I start to trust you again, something comes up to remind me of what happened. And I can't live like this anymore, Sarah. Her pleas grew more desperate, but I knew my decision was final. I'd reached a point where staying would mean living in constant suspicion and doubt, and I valued myself too much to keep enduring that. I left that conversation knowing I'd done everything I could, but that, for the sake of my own peace, it was time to let go. The days following our final talk were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The house was filled with memories of us, photos on the walls, the scent of her perfume lingering in the rooms. Each item I packed, every drawer I emptied, felt like peeling away pieces of our life together. But it also felt like shedding a weight, layer by layer. I found a small apartment across town, nothing fancy, just enough for a fresh start. The solitude was both painful and healing. I'd spent so long thinking of my life in terms of us, that it felt strange to consider my future as me again. But as the weeks went by, I found a sense of freedom I hadn't expected. I started revisiting old hobbies, things I'd put on hold while trying to mend our relationship. I picked up my guitar, rediscovered a love for hiking, and reconnected with friends I'd drifted from during the painful months of our therapy and rebuilding. Sarah reached out a few times, messages of regret and sorrow, each one tugging at old wounds. But I was determined to give myself the space I needed. I didn't respond. I knew that staying in touch, even as friends, would only reopen wounds I was working so hard to heal. My focus was on moving forward, on carving out a new path for myself, one that wasn't weighed down by mistrust or heartbreak. Months turned into a year, and with time, the pain faded. The hurt I'd carried for so long transformed into something quieter, a reminder of what I'd survived but no longer the force that defined me. I'd come to terms with Sarah's betrayal, accepting that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome broken trust. And in that acceptance, I found a peace I hadn't known was possible. I found myself smiling more, my steps lighter as I walked into each new day with a renewed sense of self. I started dating again, slowly, carefully, realizing that while Sarah had shattered my trust, she hadn't broken my spirit. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to let someone in again when the time was right. Looking back, I realized that while Sarah's betrayal had hurt, it had also forced me to confront parts of myself I'd ignored. I'd rediscovered my strength, my independence, my ability to move on. And while I didn't have closure in the way I'd once imagined, I had something better, a sense of peace, the freedom to look forward, and the knowledge that I deserved a love built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. The journey had been painful, but it had also brought me to a place where I knew, without a doubt, that I was ready for a new chapter, one where I could finally be free.